So please join me in welcoming Vandana Shiva today.
Thank you so much to all the people who've introduced the conference. And it just shows how participatory you all are, leaving nobody out. To the Safa family, I think there's generosity of your kind that leads to other people's creativity, and there's philanthropy of another kind that grabs the rest of the world, and therefore I applaud you even more. To the law school and its human rights program, and I know how much you have worked at. To the 4W Summit. I mean, can you imagine how potent that is? Women and gender and well-being all together. And from Wisconsin to the world. So not only are you participatory, you are really planetary in your imagination. We are, of course, in a very, very deep moment of crisis. Deep at the planetary level, whether it be the climate chaos. I call it chaos because change sounds too calm. It sounds like 2 degrees increase. That's fine, but no, that's not how it works. It means at harvest time we get rains. April, our wheat is wiped out. Or in the desert, Bikaner, a desert with 2 inches of rain had just been flooded before I left. Or Kerala, the land of water, has no water. So it's the chaos more than just the predictable change. And the chaos is because we are disrupting the planetary self-organizing capacity. The NASA scientist, James Lovelock, after doing a lot of research on both the climate as well as the planet, realized that our beautiful Earth was a self-organized system. And therefore he called her Gaia and wrote about the Gaia hypothesis. That we wouldn't have this temperature, we wouldn't have the climate patterns if there wasn't constant self-organization. It's those disruptions of those regulatory processes. And there is, of course, a fashion, and it comes out of deep ignorance, the idea that regulation must be broken. And so you get climate change. You get destruction of democracy. You get all the disease epidemics that we are witnessing today. But climate change doesn't happen on its own. It goes hand in hand with desertification of soils and degradation, the water crisis, the destruction of biodiversity. We've lost 93% of all cultivated varieties just in the last 50 years of farming. A farming based on fossil fuels, a farming based on a militarized mind. Everything that justifies industrial agriculture is a leftover of the war. Whether it be the nitrogen fertilizers that basically were a retooling of the explosives. And so you'll hear very often that there was a fertilizer bomb. You remember Oklahoma? Fertilizer bomb. Afghanistan, most bombs are fertilizer bomb. Oslo, fertilizer bomb. Delhi High Court, Hyderabad, fertilizer bombs. The fertilizer just being put back to the original purpose of being explosives. Every pesticide is a derivative of the nerve gases and poison gases created by IG Farben during Hitler's regime. And IG Farben was actually tried in the Nuremberg trials, but today we celebrate their chemicals as the progress of agriculture. And 100 years later, their lives get worse Their manipulations get worse. I mean, look at the situation of your Environment Protection Agency that was born after Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And of course, you remember how they troubled her. But as I look at this beautiful water body, my mind goes to all the lakes that have dried up in the last 10 years. The lake up in the former Soviet Union, you might remember its name. The Kalorie Sea. All because of cotton cultivation and irrigation. But Nigeria, Lake Chad, 22,000 square kilometers. Can you imagine? 80% of the water started to get diverted for irrigation of commodity crops. And every conflict that has been born around that lake is because of that water scarcity, because of an industrial commodified agriculture system that ecosystem could not bear. I trained the National Defense College in India, which brings all the security people from around the world, the brigadiers and the generals. And last year when I was addressing them and I talked about the shrinkage of Lake Chad and the conflicts, a brigadier from Nigeria got up and he said, "You're so right. We are so misplaced in thinking sending more armies to crush Boko Haram is the solution. The word Boko Haram did not exist in 2009 when the big drought hit northern Nigeria." He said, what we need is a huge ecological regeneration movement to bring back life to that ecosystem, and with it, hope for the 9 million people supported by that lake. When the fishermen lose the ability to catch fish, the pastoralists lose the ability to graze their animals, and the farmers lose the ability to protectively irrigate their crops, you will have conflicts. And one thing I have noticed since the time I looked at what was going on in Punjab, this is 1984. It was the year Punjab erupted in deep violence. The military was sent in to the Golden Temple, the sacred shrine of the Sikhs. By the end of the year, 2 Sikh security guards had killed Indira Gandhi because of the anger of the invasion into their most sacred shrine. And then there was a killing of about 2006 in retaliation. That's the year also when, just a few days after Indira Gandhi's assassination, a pesticide plant had a leak in the city of Bhopal. And that time it was owned by Union Carbide. Now it's owned by Dow, and Dow and DuPont are merging. I've just been doing letters to our Antitrust Competition Commission on the reasons why this merger should not be allowed. That was on the night of 2nd of December. And those two events forced me to look at what is happening to agriculture. Those days I was working for the United Nations University on a major program on conflicts over resources. And I said, something strange is happening. And I don't know where this agriculture model comes from, but it was given a Nobel Peace Prize, and there isn't much peace in Punjab. And I want to understand why. And they were very generous. They allowed me to do the study. It came out as the book, The Violence of the Green Revolution. My work showed very clearly it was the desertification of soils, the destruction of water, the depletion of groundwater, the epidemic of cancer. There's a cancer train that leaves Punjab today. Every third family has a cancer victim. Farmers not getting enough for what they grew, because now they were locked into an agriculture where, as they said in a declaration of their time, when you cannot decide what you'll grow, you cannot decide how you'll grow it. You cannot decide when the water of your own rivers will reach your fields. You cannot decide what price the produce that you grow will be sold at. It is slavery. And that's what the farmers were fighting against. But there was a big manipulation, and Punjab will never be seen as an issue of a development conflict, a human rights conflict, a natural resource conflict. it'll be projected as a religious conflict, and there was nothing about a religious conflict in it. Every person killed was controlling out of the dam or the seed breeding station or the canals. They were all people in managerial positions of the structure that the farmers viewed as their slavery. Now, it just so happens, because we've had partition in India around the time we becoming independent in 1947, and I won't go into details of that very tragic story. In fact, I might not even have been born if my mother had not been rescued, because she was trapped on what became another country and then became a refugee. Because of that, Punjab of India is largely Sikh farmers, because the Muslims all migrated the other side. So every farmer of Punjab is a Sikh. So it was very easy to call a farmer's protest a Sikh protest and then distort the narrative. And I think it's important to see how distorted the narrative of northern Nigeria has been. But it's that same year that there was a very, very severe drought in Syria. Today, when we think of Syria, we think ISIS. When I think ISIS, I think of the goddess of the earth in Egypt. And I think we should bring that word back to her. We might have much more peace. 2009, again, that same model of a thirsty agriculture which had drained all the groundwater, a climate havoc which had made extended drought the phenomena, the impossibility of the farmers to use their own well-adapted seeds and be forced to use the so-called Green Revolution varieties, which need a lot of water, need a lot of chemicals, and the chemicals have destroyed the water's holding capacity of the soil. 2009, when the drought hit, 1 million peasants of Syria moved to the city. They wanted survival. They could have had survival, but the new structural adjustment programs prevent governments from supporting farmers. Because if they start to support farmers, farmers will bounce back, and you're going to have small farm agriculture again. Very rapidly, within 2 years, it took 2 years for the story of Syria to be distorted from being a story of non-sustainable farming, of farmers' displacement, and the civil unrest that comes from 1 million people arriving in towns, and it became a story of ISIS. It became a story of war. And it is, I think, one of the most crazy narratives, because nobody knows anymore who's fighting what and who's winning what. But we do know that half of Syria is outside Syria, in refugee camps. And that has already changed the politics of other places. The wave of hate in Europe is driven a lot by that exodus. I don't have to remind you of what's going on in your country. You know it better than me. And these interconnected ecological crises that are really a result of the war against the earth are linked to the economic model that we have. An insane model that has allowed, in a short 6 years, 50% of the wealth of humanity, which was in 388 billionaires' hands, and it dropped to 177 by 2011. By 2012, it was 150. 2013, 92. 2014, it was 80. 2015, 62, which was already a shocker. And 2016, it's 8 men. 8 men control as much wealth as 50% of humanity. And how do they do it? Do they work? They don't work. They don't work. Got a crazy economy where those who don't work become billionaires, doubling and tripling their wealth. I'm just finishing off my next book, and part of it was triggered by this 1% economy and the way it's shrinking into fewer and fewer hands, and we'll now have to talk about 0.0001%, because 1% is too big to explain what's going on. And around that same time, my favorite company, Monsanto, was merging with Bayer. And I just wanted to make sense of how can a little German company be buying up this big giant? And then I realized it's just really, we used to have this game called musical chairs as children. It's just a game of musical chairs. Because now, with 20 years of deregulation of both finance, corporate investment, corporate mergers, what you have is a situation where actually all the corporations are owned by the same few investment funds. One called Vanguard. When I started writing my book last May, their assets were $3 trillion. I just went back to edit. It has shot up to 4 trillion, 1 trillion. And unlike Wall Street banks, these new investment funds are owned by the investors. There isn't a separate entity. And they're totally opaque. Totally opaque. That distorted economy based on limitless greed and a lot of violence that has to dismantle everything that comes in the way is, in my view, the most destructive force on this planet. And it is a force that's destroying and hijacking our democracy. And again, I don't have to tell you what's been happening. It was so predicted, even before your election, that everyone in the cabinet would be a nominee of the Koch brothers. And they are. Billionaires again, whose only objective is, if I'm in education, how can I make more money by privatizing education? If I'm in health, how can I make more money by privatizing health? If I'm in transport, how do I make more money by dismantling public systems in transport? And it is all about taking public goods and turning them into a source of income. I mean, as a physicist, we learned there's nothing like a perpetual motion machine. But looking at this money machine, I think they've worked out how to get a perpetual motion, ever-expanding machine. And of course, what we witnessed in every country is that as this economy takes away more and more from real working people, insecurity is an inevitability. And it's from the ground of that insecurity that a deliberate engineering of hate and fear is cultivated as the prime currency of electoral politics in our times. And electoral democracy, which was supposed to have been representing people and being of the people, by the people, for the people, is now of the corporations, by the corporations, for the corporations. And of course, the corporations are of these invisible owners behind them. The three crises, of course, not separate. They are interconnected. The violence to the earth, economic inequality, the disempowerment of women. I wrote a piece when the rapes in India started to really shoot up 2-3 years ago. And I talked about how the structural violence of an economy that was uprooting people and brutalizing society all the time was then unleashing a further step of brutalization and violence against women. The distortion and hijack of our democracy are rooted in one economic and political paradigm. First, the paradigm of greed as something to be rewarded. And second, of power as rooted in violence. I've called this capitalist patriarchy. It has been based over the last 100, 200 years on the illusion that capital somehow creates. We used to call it money. We just used to call it money. Capital, in its Latin roots, just meant heads, the head. because capital was owned in terms of how many cows do you have. So capital was the number of cows, the real assets. And money was the promise between people. The real assets were real things. The land you have, the water you have, the community you have. And now, the restructuring of how we think of economy has created this extremely strange situation where, I get a bit troubled by economic texts. I had a friend who couldn't figure out, she was studying economics, and I was doing physics, and she'd come to me and say, "Can you explain this to me?" And I'd read it, and I say, "What nonsense." But if you go to pass, just mug up the nonsense. What else do you do? Sea on top, labor and land. Labor is the creative work of people. Different kinds of work. Land is not just a commodity to be bought and sold. It is the earth. As I was mentioning today earlier during lunch, that the crisis of farmer suicide is an epidemic that has started after globalization. We've lost 310,000 farmers, and this is official data, in pockets where seed monopolies have been established under the new rules of globalization. 80,000% higher costs of cotton seed, 95% cotton seed controlled by Monsanto. Monsanto collecting illegal royalties, all these are issues in our high courts and Supreme Court. Every day there's a court case. But every suicide that I know, the farmer will borrow the last bit of chemical, a pesticide bottle, and go into his field and drink that water and die. And I've always felt that going to the land, his mother, for him, the shock that he thought he'd do better for his family, with all these fake promises. The advertisements used to say you're going to be a millionaire. Advertisements used to say God is bringing, we have 300 million devotees in India, so there's all kinds of choice Monsanto has for free salesmen. They tried Guru Nanak Dev, they tried Hanumanji, they tried Krishnaji, they tried everyone. And the poor farmer really thinks if, Hanuman is saying, this is white gold. There's an amazing story of Hanuman carrying a mountain. And so all the advertisements had this mountain, but it was now GM seeds. And when the farmer gets trapped and he feels he's let down his family, he's let down the land of his ancestors. And of course, this is one area where not only have I been trolled limitlessly for speaking the truth about suicides, but for 1 month we had Tamil farmers protesting in Delhi because they've had a drought and they're in debt, and they wanted debt relief, and the government has not met them for a month. And the issue is very simple, because if you solve the problem of the farmers, like in Syria, you will have to not create bigger markets for what I call the poison cartel. So if you're committed to the poison cartel and establishing the monopolies for chemicals and GMOs and seeds, then you will let more and more farmers die. Years ago, when industrial agriculture was spreading in this country, I remember, because when I started to work on globalization, I read everything. And there was a statement there, we've got to get the small farmer off the land, like you get the last bit of toothpaste out of a toothpaste tube. You have to squeeze them out. And when the early suicide started, I remember a PR person of Monsanto in India wrote a column saying it's good they're going, because they should disappear anyway. There's no future for small farmers. Even though we have all the data that small farmers produce more. We have all the data that biodiverse farms produce more. We have all the data that women produce more. I had to do a lecture for the FAO some years ago on women feeding the world, and they've given me an award. And I put together very quickly some data on different parts of the country. I know my own. And I know, both through our studies as well as my eyes, that small farms run by women for food for the family have far more production than the large-scale farms growing commodities that aren't food anyway in the first place. Only 10% of the corn and soya grown in the world is going for food. 90% is going for biofuel and animal feed. It's not a food system. But just look at this amazing data. In Nigerian home gardens, women plant 18 to 57 plant species. And in 5% of the land, they grow more food than 50% of the land under commodity crops. In sub-Saharan Africa, it's supposed to be a desert, as much as 120 plants are grown. In Guatemala, home gardens of less than 0.1 hectare have more than 10 tree crop species. And in a single African home garden, more than 60 species of food-producing trees are counted. But trees aren't considered food in the industrial system, because you can't sell non-renewable seed every year. Once you plant your jackfruit, it's there for 100 years. You plant your mango, it's there for 200 years. And of course, as I have been saving seeds over 30 years now, your 40th birthday for the Women's Summit, I've just celebrated 30 years of starting Navdanya in '87 as a program of the Research Foundation, when at a meeting the corporations laid out and said, we're not making enough money out of chemicals, so we will have to use genetic engineering, and our main profits will come from patenting. And they talked about how they wanted a World Trade Organization treaty to impose intellectual property laws on the world. And that's the day I decided to save seeds. I said, life is not your invention. A patent is given for an invention. You can't have patents on these seeds. And I worked with my government to make sure that our patent laws exclude patents on plants and animals, including seed. And that's a big case that's being fought right now. In fact, I was writing briefs for lawyers. It's an Article 3J that's going to be at the center. It's been at the center since the beginning. But, one would think they would get tired in 30 years. They haven't, but we haven't either. And I'm now prepared for the next 30 years. Just made a commitment. Just done a 12-day pilgrimage through every part of India where we had a freedom movement over the last 2 centuries, to both honor the descendants, remember the sacrifice of our freedom fighters, and commit ourselves to sowing the seeds of new freedom in our times. And the commitment we've made is we are going to work for a poison-free India by 2047, which will be 100 years of our freedom. And the reason I feel very confident that in spite of all the propaganda, in spite of all the violence, in spite of all the hijack of decision-making, the results of serving the earth with love, recognizing her intelligence in the tiniest root hair. Darwin had written a book on how the roots were the brains of the plant, and now they're doing all the research of how in one plant you have more communication going on than all of the internet. Our gut, with trillions of microbes, now being called the second brain. We have this crazy assumption that only some kinds of human beings have brains, that women don't. We don't work and we don't think. The entire economy is based on we don't work. The entire scientific epistemology is based on we don't have knowledge. And I remember I did 100 years of one of the colleges in the East, that 5-college area, a women's college, probably was either Smith or Mount Holyoke. And I like to go over archives to get familiar with an institution. And the debates on the founding of a women's college was, if women go to college, their brains will expand and their uterus will shrink. And it'll be a danger to the future of reproduction. I mean, that's how illiterate they are about how the body works. But they're equally literate about how the economy works. Because having created this fictitious creative potential for capital, a fictitious creative potential was given to the owners of capital. And they were given rights above human rights. Of course, now they're trying to leap into the idea that corporations are persons, and the ability to influence democracy with money is their free speech. And sometimes people will ask me, do you hate Monsanto? I said, I can't hate Monsanto. I don't like to hate anyway, but Monsanto isn't a person. And, like we hugged the trees in Chipko 45 years ago to stop the logging in my region in the mountains. I said I'd go and hug Monsanto if they were a person, but they aren't. And their CEOs and all hide. They all hide because every day they have to tell 20 lies to maintain their company. But what has been created is a fiction of what the economy is. And this very, very good book written by Ronnie Lesson and Alexander Scheffer, one's French and I think one's Austrian, and they say in the chapter on women's empowerment, if the fathers of capitalist theory had chosen a mother rather than a single bourgeois male as the smallest economic unit for their theoretical constructions, they would not have been able to formulate the axiom of the selfish nature of human beings in the way they did. So, you take one particular species on this planet of the 300 million, then you take one particular gender, race, class of that species, and give them qualities that aren't human in the first place. And turn that inhumanity into a fundamental trait. And then destroy all the humanity of sharing, of public systems, of commons, because it's not fitting into that model. That's why we have to bring women into the picture. And if women counted, the people's sustenance economy would be much bigger. It is, it just doesn't get counted. The two dear friends and colleagues, one from Finland, she worked for the UN, Hilka Pietellä, and Devaki Jain, who's now very old in my country, they did a bit of counting and found how much bigger women's economy was. But more important than that, if women were counting, you wouldn't have a fictitious finance economy that's 100 times bigger than the real economy, and then destroying the real economy. So we have to resurrect the real. And in the resurrection of the real, it'll have to be women who take the lead. I did my Ph.D. in quantum theory, which changed the idea of what real is. Real before was hard stuff, immutable particles, all acting at a distance, all changing through force. You could only move something through action on force. And all there was quantity, mass, weight, force. And quantum theory taught us that there's nothing like fixed entities in the universe. Everything is potential. And nothing is separate. Everything is interrelated. And as we start to realize that interconnected reality, that we are not separate from nature, we are not the masters and the conquerors, we are part of the earth. That water is us. That air is us. The soil is us. The seeds are us. The food is us. Food, of course, I think has been the most abused. I mean, it's the most basic need we have. But food now is treated like stuff. Just stuff. That you stuff. With no quality of its own. Again, just wait. I call food and agriculture the ultimate victory of Descartes. Just weight and dimension. I don't know. There's taste, there's nourishment, there's flavors. And we are now realizing very rapidly what ancient cultures and ancient knowledge systems have been teaching us forever. India has the oldest healthcare system of the world. 5,000 years of deep research and knowledge through Ayurveda. Ayur, life, Veda, the knowledge and science of life. And Ayurveda told us that diversity is vital to health. Lancet has just published a paper saying the reason we need small farms is because they cultivate diversity, and diversity is vital to health. When we grow diversity and we grow it organically, we actually improve the soil health. We've just completed a 20-year study, long-term study on our farm, and farms nearby which use chemicals. The organic matter has gone down on chemical farms by 14%, increased on our farms and other organic farmers between 29 to 99%. Nitrogen has gone down in spite of applying urea by up to 22%, gone up by 100%. NPK is all there is in industrial farming. Potassium's gone down 22%, increased 84%. Micronutrient deficiencies are a big issue. Zinc has gone down 37% in chemical farms. It has increased 14% on organic farms. Magnesium, associated a lot now with attention deficit disorder, 17% less chemical farms, 14% more in organic farms. And it's those micronutrients and trace elements that soil organisms create. Soil organisms that are so rich that in 1 gram of soil you have 30,000 protozoa, 50,000 algae, 400,000 fungi. And in 1 spoonful you have 1 billion bacteria, which would be 1 ton when measured on an acre. But the economics of greed has gone hand in hand with an inability to see the small. And it must destroy the small. Partly because it doesn't see it, so it doesn't know what it's destroying, but partly because it is very afraid of the small. I always believe capitalist patriarchy deepest fear is a fear of everything free and alive, and that's why there's so much violence against women. Because we are free and we are alive. On our own terms. The 100 trillion microbes in our gut containing 7 million genes. Therefore, for each human gene, there are 360 bacteria. And we are only 10% human. First of all, that crazy pyramid where man sits on top. No, it doesn't work. We are one big web where bacteria have us as their diet. But more importantly, it's so wrong because there isn't anything like a human body separate from all these other microbes that make us and make us healthy. I would recommend to you to read the publications by Nancy Swanson, who's been tracking the Center for Disease Control data. And I was briefing the Chinese security system some years ago, 2 years ago. And they were having a debate, should we go GMO way, should we not go GMO way? Now they bought up Syngenta, so they'll go the GMO way. But every chronic disease currently in the US, the curve is exponential, and it's going parallel to the use of the glyphosates and the Roundup Ready crops. Stephanie Seneff's paper on this prediction is showing that in a few years, every second child in this country will be autistic, largely because of the damage to the gut bacteria, because of the chemicals. And of course, Monsanto lies very easily and says, oh, nothing can happen to humans because we don't have the shikimate pathway, but the bacteria do. And so we have this amazing contest between truth and a new vocabulary that your president has given the world, alternative fact, And there are others, isn't there? Post-truth. There's that versus the lived realities. Because you can't have abstract fact versus abstract fact. But the experience of an illness is an experience of an illness. And it's that embodied knowledge that women have always been bringing out and saying this should count. This knowledge should count. We're reaching a stage where science is verifying the fact that intelligence is not the property of these fictitious entities like Monsanto. Intelligence is distributed in every element of our body, in every cell of our body, in every microbe in the soil. It's a distributed intelligence. The universe is alive because it is intelligent. And because it's intelligent, we have hope. People say to me, where do you get hope? I said, I get hope first because of quantum theory, because there's total uncertainty. If there was predictability, we should just leap into that lake. But there isn't. There's potential, and the potential is cultivated by us. We've had the 1% cultivating the potential of greed and hate and naturalizing it as human traits. We have the potential to cultivate the nonviolence, the sharing, the love. The artificial walls that have been built, that have excluded women's work, women's knowledge, are walls that need to be broken down. And new walls of any kind shouldn't be built anyway, no matter who pays for it. And work for well-being, work and knowledge for well-being, I think is going to be the area where our future work will really matter. The GDP created a production boundary. If you produce what you consume, you don't produce. That's why women don't work. They just said it. If you produce what you consume, you don't produce. So only commodity production counts. You cut a forest, it leads to growth. You grow a forest, there's nothing. You create sickness, you have growth. You bring up healthy children, you have no growth. You maintain this wonderful lake and conserve the water, no growth. You pollute it, new contracts will be given to the same oil companies that contributed to the pollution. I work very closely with the government of Bhutan, which was wise enough to say we're not going to measure GDP because it's a mismeasure. We're going to measure gross national happiness and well-being. And the Prime Minister of Bhutan, the late Prime Minister before the current one, wrote to me a very touching letter and said, we're committed to well-being for all, but I can't see any other way of growing well-being outside organic farming and keeping chemicals and GMOs out. And will you help us in this transition to 100% organic Bhutan? So we do. My colleagues in Navdanya go there every year. The Bhutanese farmers come to us. And every year, the Bhutanese Center for Gross National Happiness comes and joins me and other Gandhians to teach this course on Gandhi, globalization, and gross national happiness. Part of it was people were losing direction of how do you deal with giant corporations. And Gandhi had taught us that. First, you say no, which is the Champaran Satyagraha. And second, you pull out your spinning wheels. Now, each of us has to find our spinning wheels. It could be in education, it could be in law, it could be in health, but there are lots of spinning wheels waiting to be spun. And in this transition, I believe women will be in the lead, not because there's anything essential in us. I'm not an essentialist. I do not talk of womanly as an essentialized trait, but as a socially cultivated trait, because we were left to the things that the market thought didn't matter, which in the economy of life are the things that really matter. You know, Aristotle had called oikonomia the art of living. So in the art of living, we are experts. He had called the art of making money, chromatistics. The 1% is experts in that, but they're messing up the planet and our lives. So we need to reclaim what is ours. Taking care of well-being, cultivated well-being, is, in my view, the most important work in our lives, in the lives of our communities and families, all the way to the planetary level. And that's why I feel cultivating small gardens everywhere, to just make it concrete that in that garden we become one with the earth. In sowing that seed, we experience the generosity of the seed and the soil and our own capacities. When we have lots of school gardens, hundreds of school gardens, when I ask the children, what did you learn most? Ma'am, one tomato seed I planted, and then he gave me tomatoes and tomatoes and tomatoes and lots of seeds. Now that lesson of multiplicity is never taught to a child. The lesson of the Terminator is taught to a child. And because our human potentials of being violent or not violent, greedy or not greedy, hateful or loving, our potentials, the womanly potential, is something men can adopt. And Gandhi used to say a prayer. He used to say 2 prayers every day. One was, the real experience of the divine is compassion for the excluded. And the second prayer he used to say is, make me more womanly. So let's all be more womanly. Let's recognize our power. I always say we don't need empowerment. We just want you to stop disempowerment. The rest we'll take care of. So all power to you. Thank you. Questions? Want to say on here?
Now we have the opportunity to take a few questions. I think we'll take one question at a time until.
Can you help me understand what I've read and heard called the Great Paradox? That sometimes people who are the most affected by the 1% or by economies or the rich folks or whatever you want to call it, some people say they vote against their own interests. They're not thinking about some of these connections that you're making. Can you help me understand that paradox of why people who are affected by some of these policies are still kind of supporting people who are in support of those policies?
Well, there are 3 reasons why the worst victims of, let's just call them the policies of greed and rewarding greed, the worst victims are supporting the system. The first is they're vulnerable. And I was told that there's some town in Ohio, Dayton, which has totally been trashed. Trump went there. Hillary did not. So they feel they're being cared for. The second is, as this book called Dark Money gives in a lot of detail, people were sent to these communities to make them believe that their big enemies were the liberals. You don't really have much of a left, but so-called leftist. I mean, that's what they're doing in Europe for sure, in India. The left liberals and progressives, that they've got you into this mess. But the third is the fact that we have, just like the financial economy is 100 times bigger than the real economy, the propaganda machine is thousands of times bigger than real communication. And people are being fed the propaganda day in and day out. That's what's getting them trapped in their little bubbles. And for me, that's probably the most serious issue, that we are literally having our minds colonized with post-truth. So we need a lot more community work. We need a lot more solidarity. And then the divide and rule is, of course, when I'm going to leave this with whichever department should have it. I just did this book for this pilgrimage I've done for freedom. And of course, most of it is in Indian, in Hindi words, but it was about seed freedom and food freedom for a living in free India. And I reproduced here the fact that in 1857, when the Indians rose against the East India Company, the Muslims and the Hindus rose together. Half the names at the memorial site are Muslim, half of them are Hindu. And then the divide and rule policies were institutionalized. Artificial identities were constructed. An entire system was deployed to cultivate hate. So this whole issue of white supremacy, there are armies out there promoting it, making a fear. Someone in Dayton lost a job because of globalization and corporations running away to make more money. But you can always point to the migrant as the reason you don't have a job. And so that's why I said, in an economy of greed, the political currency is now becoming hate. Because if you don't do that, people will rise and find options. But we have to rise and find options anyway. Yeah.
So you're at a university that does a lot of research in agriculture that tends to support those more dominant systems. But for those of us who are doing research that we want to support smaller farmers, which is becoming less and less viable, and more biodiversity and food that's actually good for people, what research questions do you think we should be looking into?
One, come to India. Come to India and see. But, when I started to look at the Green Revolution, and I could see those fields weren't producing enough. I could see the costs of cultivation were totally outstripping what the farmer was earning. So the calculus was just wrong, because productivity is supposed to be output per unit input. Now, in terms of output, all that was being measured was a monoculture commodity. All the biodiversity was being left out, all the ecological functions of soil, farm trees, pollinators, none of it was being included. But more important than that, input was being left out. The costs of production were being left out. The chemicals going in were being left out. All that was being counted was labor in that crazy calculus. Now, then you have a tautological situation that the less people on the land, the more efficient and productive your system. And I had a debate with one of our very, very big IT companies who was saying, oh, we've made India so rich and we've contributed to growth, but these farmers are dragging the growth down. And the denominator should be decreased. And I asked him, by denominator, you mean the number of farmers? He said, yes. I said, but honestly, they are equal citizens on this land as you. You might be a billionaire. But they too have a place in this society. So it's a very constructed efficiency and productivity system. Yield itself doesn't measure anything of the quality of food. So we started to measure nutrition, and we generated indicators of nutrition per acre and health per acre. And we can feed 2 Indias through ecological agriculture on the basis of our field data. We then took the true cost accounting. We call that book The Wealth Per Acre, partly because it rhymes, but health per acre, wealth per acre, sounds good. $1.2 trillion is the externalities for social costs, farmer suicides, and environmental damage. If you add the health costs, it's another 1.5 trillion. Our GDP is 1.3. Just the shadow costs of the industrial chemical system for one country alone is nearly 3 trillion. These are research issues that we need to take up globally. I think we need to take up globally the deep connections between food and health. Yeah. given that the old paradigm is breaking down, totally broken down. And that's the other place where I get hope. That, there might be 3 biosafety experts who get hounded by Monsanto, but are they going to hound every person who's looking at the gut microbiome? Are they going to hound every person who's looking at the soil ecology? No, there's too many. And when I say 300 million species, 7 billion people, a lot of intelligence, that's the research we need to do.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate the concept of bringing yourself into your science and your study, and I feel that in my experience in academia, this has been something that has been somewhat bred out of me, and something that I'd like to regain and incorporate in the work that I am doing and will do. And I wondered if you had any suggestions for self-care and how you can turn a passion for science and social justice and political activism into a source of love and compassion rather than a mechanism for wearing down your love and compassion.
By engaging in real situations and real communities that you feel passion for. Yeah. Because, I've been doing the combination of activism and intellectual work now for more than 45 years. Just this very tough journey, 45 degrees temperature, no fans, no heat, cooling, nothing, dirt roads. You come away recharged rather than depleted. But that's because you care. So don't do it mechanically. If you care for indigenous people, begin there. If you care for the water, begin there. If you care for children, begin there. Begin wherever you feel the early sowing of love, and it'll grow. It'll grow in you, it'll grow in others.
We have a question from the overflow room. Are you guys able to hear us down there?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, I hope I can be heard down there. I'm wondering how do you see it? Okay. I'm asking from the perspective of community development, international development. What kind of role do you think you can see that smallholder farmers in the global south, the people that are dealing with their own survival day by day and with natural disasters and access to the basic services not available, what kind of active role do they or can they play in this struggle?
Well, they are playing an active role. I've worked a lot in communities affected by climate disasters. I've done a lot of work with the women. They know more than anyone else what's needed for adaptation. They know the crops. They know the land management. But most importantly, in every one of these situations, the resilience and the insurance can only come in a lasting way from 2 places. The resilience in nature and ecosystems, and our research is showing how soils with organic matter are much more resilient. Of course, biodiverse systems are much more resilient. But also resilience through community. When you have each other, that's the biggest resilience. Now, that's going to be the big challenge, because the very forces and paradigms that have led, for example, to climate change, and my book, Soil Not Oil, assess 50% greenhouse gases are coming from industrial farming, those forces are ready to harvest climate change as their next market. So Monsanto has just bought up the world's biggest climate data corporation. the world's biggest soil data corporation. They're working with machinery companies like John Deere, to put spyware into tractors so that the tractor spyware will send them the soil data and then they'll sell it back to the farmers as a new commodity. Having bought the Climate Data Corporation, they're also working with Silicon Valley firms. I think they just bought up about 60 of them on surveillance systems, drones and surveillance. And they're looking at interconnecting the seed, the chemical, the soil data, the climate data with insurance to be sold. $3 trillion annually is their assessment. For seed, in '87, their assessment was $1 trillion if all seed has to be bought by farmers. So they're talking about making even more money from this. So we need to move away from commodification everywhere into commons and community. And we will need it very much, no matter where you are. It's not just about peasants in the South. It's about the young people of this country. It's about the workers who have been laid waste in this country. It's about every place. Our communities and our commons, that's our real strength.
Okay. All right. This ties into the community. You and Wendell Berry both have said one of the things we can do is stay in one place and become committed to one place. And I've been visiting a sister-in-law with ALS in Austin. The only flying I've been doing and only leaving of the place. And coming back Monday night, there was a napkin on the Delta flight, and it said, "No one ever changed the world by staying in one place." And I looked at that napkin and I thought, oh my God. Even here, feeling guilty about traveling. So, and this ties into community. Our children go away to college, they go away to get jobs, they go away. And as an old person, I like to be with my family, but I need to stay in one place. And how do I talk to my children about, you have to stay in one place? It doesn't have to be around me, but how do we get our young people to change the world where they are?
Well, my government has just announced they want to make air travel affordable to every Indian. They don't say every Indian, they say the middle classes. So they're dismantling our train system. But I think there's this uprooting as a culture is vital to the greed machine. Because if we stay home, we need very little. We are producers. When we are home, we are producers and creators, and we're community. When we run around, we always have to get the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, in addition to the flight ticket. The bad food also, now they make you pay on flights. And I think that de-addiction to consumerism also means moving only when necessary. I think as far as their worry about the future generations is concerned, I have read a lot of kids are staying home for the simple reason there's no other place to go to. And I know in Italy, where half the young people are unemployed, they're all staying home now. Mama's always ready to look after them. Same in Greece, 50% unemployment. And I find a lot of hope in those young people because they know they have to stay home and make something of it. And I helped the government of Rome. They said, you promote organic farming, Dr. Shiva, but we have a huge unemployment crisis. How can you put the two together? I said, show me your map. They showed me the map. So many green areas, the greenest city in Europe. I said, invite some unemployed youth to run community gardens in some of those spaces. They actually did it. And maybe while they're looking for the next one, I know women hate the Pope. But please read the Laudato Si and about taking care of our common home. Because once we know that this is our home, then running away isn't what you want to do. It's when we are made to forget home, both as the planet as well as our place, that there's always the idea that somewhere else will be nicer. So all the young boys, if India, leave their villages. And my challenge is to have them experience that growing food, creating new opportunities for the community can be a good option. And I'm so happy that our main trainer was a runaway from home. And now he travels the country and he travels internationally to teach people how to do farming and stay home. Yeah.
You touched on this briefly regarding the use of plants being grown, particularly Monsanto plants being grown, for feeding animals and for other uses. Wisconsin's full of fields, full of Monsanto soybeans and corn. And my question is, being a vegan, I'm just wondering what your opinion would be on plant-based diets versus animal protein-based diets, the impact that has not only on climate, which many of these statistics you've cited are related to animal agriculture producing methane and other climate change gases. So what I'm wondering is, with everybody wanting to do something about climate chaos, climate change, whatever you want to call it, if this isn't something we should consider, that animal agriculture needs to be at least reduced in our lives, and we need to be looking at plant-based diets as a way to save the planet, to make it much more beneficial to have these small gardens eating our plant-based diets.
There was, of course, as part of the whole food industry, a calorie reductionism, as if all the food was only growing more calories, and so we left out all the other crops. In India, we left out our pulses and our oilseeds, and they actually declined, while the wheat and the rice went up. But there was also this crazy protein reductionism and elevation of the meat diet as an indicator of progress. I remember President Bush, 2008, when the prices shot up, said it's those Indians to blame because they're getting rich, and if they're getting rich, they're eating meat, and if they're eating meat, they're eating up the CO. So I did an article to show that 12% increase in cereal consumption for factory farms in this country, and only 2% increase of cereal consumption in India for human beings. We weren't the reason the prices were going up. I would not use the term animal agriculture. I would use the term factory farms. Factory farms are where the methane comes from. Come and smell the cows on our farm. They don't stink. When they are on a diet of grass, which is what their four stomachs are meant for, they're called herbivores because they like herbs. And if you don't have animals on the farm, you will have fossil fuel use. So we are a fossil fuel-free farm. We have to have bullocks. My big debate with animal rights people in India is, remember, the biggest place animals are cared for is when they are part of the farm family, an extension of the farm family. And they are not commodities and machines to produce just milk or just meat, but are companions. The big challenge in India is the cow whom I've loved, and in my book, Stolen Harvest, I have a chapter called Sacred Cow or Mad Cow. The cow, unfortunately, in India is now being used for killing people. I won't go into details about it, but I worry. I worry about the fact that any kind of fundamentalism makes us intolerant. And yes, science is teaching us what we knew in India, that more diversity of plants is necessary for a healthy diet. The reason the Italians got onto the UNESCO list of food heritage is because suddenly it was discovered that they don't eat only meat. They do eat a bit of beans and vegetables. And definitely diversity in our diet and diversity of diets is vital. But I've been in this so long, I remember we organized an Arctic to the Amazon conference. And my really good friends, and this was in Massachusetts, my really good friends organized a total vegetarian lunch. The Amazon Indians and the Arctic First Nations walked out and said, this is not our food. So I think we need respect for the diversity of food cultures. We should definitely not allow violence against women, which is factory farming. We should recognize we are an earth family and animals are part of that family and love them and care for them.
Got another question from upstairs. Hi, Vandana Shiva. Thank you so much for being here. And actually, I got the privilege of visiting your farm in India and saw your very, very healthy cows. So thank you for that. I'm actually curious what you would say about how we can include more people in this conversation. I feel like you're a catalyst for so much fruitful conversation. I have a lot of amazing conversations in the Ecology program here. How do we talk to more people and connect more and learn more? Like particularly like those 8 people who have 50% of the wealth, how can we include them and others like them in the conversation?
Well, if I knew who exactly those 8 are, I mean, there's a number out there with Bill Gates and Buffett, but I don't really think that they're the only ones. I think they're names that don't get onto the Forbes list. A lot of my friends have been telling me I should talk to Bill Gates because unfortunately he's financing everything wrong. GMOs for Africa, clinical trials on women. I think 22 women died in India. And there was a whole case against his pushing, I think, pentavalent vaccines. But, you know, he doesn't think he needs to talk to anybody. He thinks he knows everything, including the writing of one history, because while pedaling in his gym, he saw a video by an Australian who said there should be one history. So he said, yeah, one history. No, we have many histories and many her stories. The way we have to expand this conversation is not stop at a conversation. The crisis is too deep for us to not make the conversation action. And the more we link to people through action, finding real solutions, which also means that the old comfortable system of their experts and their stupid people, we have to give it away. We have to adopt a new humility to say, we are living on a planet in crisis. We are living in societies in crisis. We are suffering an economy generating all these crises, and each of us has to be the solution. As Gandhi said, we have to be the change we want to see. And being the change we want to see means nothing is too small to be the change.
We have time for one more question.
I just wanted to ask what the situation is with the seed banks in India.
Well, the seed banks that we love and care for are expanding.
No, the government.
The government actually had a suggestion that governments cannot take care of seeds and so it should be privatized, which is, you know, everyone gets into government to then say we can't do the job, let the corporations do it. It's a disease, it's global disease. I did a lot of activism then to stop the selling off to corporations, but basically what we have to do very, very quickly is grow diversity wherever we can. And every garden must be a seed sanctuary. And even while we recognize we are losing things, not allow the loss to become a source of depression, but allow the regeneration to become a source of hope.